wish that changed everything. The rain hammered against the glass window of the upscale Italian restaurant as 7-year-old Maya pressed her nose against it, her breath creating small circles of fog that disappeared as quickly as they formed. Inside, families laughed over plates of golden pasta and steaming pizzas, their joy separated from her by nothing more than a pane of glass and an entire world of circumstances. Her stomach growled, a sound she'd learned to ignore over the past 3 days, as her eyes fixed on a poster displaying a perfect margherita pizza, its cheese bubbling and golden under restaurant lights that seemed to glow like heaven itself. Her lips barely moved, but the words escaped anyway, carried on a whisper so soft it shouldn't have reached anyone's ears. I wish I could eat that, but someone did hear her. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Trillionaire in Love. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Marcus Wellington hadn't planned to be on this particular street corner that evening. The CEO of Wellington Enterprises, a tech conglomerate worth billions, had just left a disappointing dinner meeting at that very restaurant. His driver had gotten stuck in traffic 2 blocks away, and Marcus, frustrated and impatient, had decided to walk. He was the kind of man who solved problems, who built empires, who commanded boardrooms with a single glance. But he couldn't command the rain to stop, and he couldn't command away the image of the little girl in the tattered pink jacket, staring at food she couldn't have. He'd heard her whisper. Everyone else had walked past, umbrellas tilted against the rain, eyes fixed on their phones, ears plugged with headphones. But Marcus had heard her. Maybe it was because he'd once been hungry too, though that was a lifetime ago. A memory he'd buried under years of success and expensive suits. Maybe it was because his own daughter would have been around Maya's age if she'd lived past her 2nd birthday. Maybe it was simply because, for the first time in years, Marcus was actually paying attention to the world outside his corporate bubble. He stopped walking. The rain soaked through his $2,000 suit, but he didn't notice. He turned back and saw Maya still standing there, still staring, her small frame shivering in the cold evening air. Her shoes had holes in them. Her jacket was at least 2 sizes too small. And her eyes. Those eyes held something that made Marcus's chest tighten in a way no business setback ever had. They held hope fighting desperately against the weight of resignation. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly, approaching her slowly so as not to startle her. "Are you here alone?" Maya jumped, her eyes going wide with the wariness of a child who'd learned too young that the world could be dangerous. She took a step back, ready to run. Marcus held up his hands. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I heard you. What you said about the food." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you like to go inside and have some dinner?" The hope that flashed across Maya's face was immediately crushed by fear. "I don't have any money," she said, her voice barely audible. "And my mama says I shouldn't talk to strangers." "Your mama is very wise," Marcus said, crouching down to her level despite the puddle soaking into his knees. "Where is your mama now?" Maya's lower lip trembled. "She's at the hospital. She's been there for 2 days. My neighbor Mrs. Chen was supposed to watch me, but she had to go help her own daughter, and Mama doesn't know I'm here. I walked from the shelter because I heard them say they might have to close it this week, and I was scared, and I just wanted to see food, even if I couldn't eat it." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if once the dam had broken, Maya couldn't stop the flood. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, that carefully constructed wall he'd built between himself and the suffering of others. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maya. Maya Santos." "Well, Maya Santos, my name is Marcus. And I think we should go inside this restaurant together, have some dinner, and then figure out how to help your mama." "What do you say?" Maya studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus found himself hoping he'd pass whatever test was happening behind those careful, old beyond their years eyes. Finally, she nodded. Inside the restaurant, heads turned. Marcus Wellington was recognizable, even soaking wet. His face had been on the cover of Forbes enough times. But it was the sight of the bedraggled little girl beside him that caused whispers to ripple through the dining room. The maitre d' approached with barely concealed horror at their appearance, but one look from Marcus silenced any objection. "A table for 2, Marcus said, "and bring us that pizza from the poster outside, along with whatever else you think a growing child should eat." As they sat down, Maya's hands trembled as she touched the white tablecloth, as if afraid she might soil it. Marcus ordered hot chocolate for her and watched as she wrapped her small hands around the mug when it arrived, the warmth seeming to thaw something frozen inside her. "Tell me about your mama," Marcus said, and Maya did. She told him about Ana Santos, a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after Maya's father had died in a construction accident. She told him how her mama would go without food so Maya could eat, how she'd smile even when Maya knew she was exhausted, how she'd gotten sick last week, but kept working until she'd collapsed at her night shift cleaning office buildings. She told him about the hospital that was treating her mother, but the bills that were piling up like mountains they could never climb. The pizza arrived, that perfect margarita Maya had been staring at through the window. Her eyes filled with tears. "It's even more beautiful up close," she whispered. Marcus had eaten in the finest restaurants across the world, but he'd never seen anyone appreciate food the way Maya did in that moment. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and Marcus found himself unable to eat his own meal, too caught up in the simple joy radiating from this child who'd been given something as basic as dinner. But as the meal went on, Marcus's mind was already working, already planning. This wasn't just about one meal. This was about a little girl who should be playing with dolls and worrying about homework, not where her next meal would come from, or whether her mother would survive. This was about a system that had failed people like Maya and Ana Santos, while men like him accumulated wealth beyond measure. After dinner, Marcus made calls. First to his personal physician, who immediately contacted the hospital where Ana Santos was being treated, and arranged for the best specialists to take over her care, all expenses covered. Then to his lawyer, who began working on setting up a fund to cover the Santos family's living expenses. Then to his assistant, who started researching support systems for families in crisis. But Marcus didn't stop there. As he sat in that restaurant with Maya, waiting for Child Protective Services to arrange a temporary guardian who could take her safely to the hospital to see her mother, he made a decision that would change the trajectory of his entire company. "Maya," he said, "what would you do if you could help other kids like you?" She thought about it seriously, her small brow furrowed. "I'd make sure nobody ever had to stare at food through windows. I'd make sure all the mamas and papas could take care of their babies without getting so tired they get sick. And I'd make sure kids knew that somebody cares about them, even when things are really, really hard." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. She'd just outlined a social mission statement, more powerful than anything his PR team had ever crafted. The challenges that followed weren't small. The media caught wind of the story. Billionaire CEO saves hungry child, and tried to turn it into a feel-good piece that wrapped everything up in a neat bow. But Marcus refused to let it be just a story. He faced fierce opposition from his board of directors when he announced Wellington Enterprises would be redirecting a significant portion of its profits to establish the Maya Foundation, an organization dedicated to fighting food insecurity and supporting families in medical crisis. "You're going to tank our stock price," one board member shouted during a heated meeting. "Then let it tank," Marcus replied. "What good is wealth if we're blind to the people suffering in its shadow?" Some investors pulled out. Some board members resigned. The financial press wrote scathing editorials about bleeding heart billionaires who'd lost their edge. But Marcus didn't waver. He'd seen himself in Maya, not just the hungry child he'd once been, but the person he'd stopped seeing as he climbed the ladder of success. She'd reminded him that net worth and self-worth were different currencies, and he'd been bankrupt in the way that mattered most. Ana Santos recovered. The treatment worked, and within a month, she was well enough to return home. Not to the shelter, but to an apartment Marcus's foundation had arranged, complete with a job training program that would help her build a more sustainable career. But Ana herself presented a challenge Marcus hadn't anticipated. "I don't want charity," she told him firmly when they finally met, her eyes fierce despite her weakened state. "I want to earn my way." Marcus respected that. So he offered her a job as a community liaison for the Maya Foundation, using her lived experience to help identify and support other families in need. Ana accepted, and she became one of the foundation's most valuable assets, someone who understood both the struggles and the solutions in ways Marcus never could. Maya thrived. With food security, stable housing, and her mother healthy, she bloomed like a flower that had finally found sunlight. But the most remarkable thing was how she never forgot where she'd come from. When the Maya Foundation opened its first community center, Maya insisted on being there, handing out food to other kids who reminded her of herself. At age 7, she became the face of the foundation, not because Marcus wanted a poster child, but because Maya wanted to help. The ripple effects spread wider than Marcus had imagined. Other wealthy individuals, inspired or shamed by his example, began similar initiatives. The Maya Foundation grew, opening centers across the country. Wellington Enterprises' stock price eventually recovered as consumers rallied behind a company that put people first. And Marcus discovered something more valuable than any quarterly earnings report. He discovered purpose. 2 years after that rainy night, Marcus stood in front of a crowd at the opening of the Maya Foundation's 50th Community Center. Maya, now 9, stood beside him. Anna Santos, now the Foundation's Director of Community Outreach, watched proudly from the front row. "Someone once told me," Marcus said to the assembled crowd, "that success without significance is the ultimate failure. I didn't understand that until a little girl whispered a wish she thought no one would hear. She wished she could eat. Such a simple thing, such a basic human need, and yet millions of children in our wealthy nation whisper that same wish every day." He looked down at Maya. "This young lady taught me that hearing isn't enough. Listening requires action, and that action, multiplied across communities and across hearts, can change the world." Maya stepped up to the microphone, confident now in a way that hunger and fear had once prevented. "I still remember that night," she said, her voice clear. "I remember thinking that wishes didn't come true for kids like me. But Mr. Marcus heard my wish and he did something about it. Now I want to ask all of you, whose wish will you hear? Whose whisper will you answer? Because there are kids out there right now, standing outside in the rain, staring at things they think they can never have. And maybe they can't have everything, but they deserve food. They deserve safety. They deserve someone who cares enough to stop and listen." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about that moment 2 years ago, about how close he'd come to walking past, to being just another person who didn't want to see the uncomfortable truth of suffering. He thought about all the board meetings and business deals that had once seemed so crucial but now felt hollow compared to this, to the knowledge that hundreds of families were sleeping in safe beds and eating regular meals because one person had stopped to listen. As the event concluded, and people mingled over refreshments provided by the news center, a young woman approached Marcus tentatively. She was holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 5 years old, who looked at the tables of food with the same wonder Maya had shown 2 years ago. "Excuse me, Mr. Wellington," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to say thank you. 6 months ago, I was where Miss Santos was, sick, broke, terrified I'd lose my son to the system. Your foundation helped us, and now I have a job and my son has a safe place to grow up, and I wanted you to know that what you're doing matters." The little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama, can I have pizza?" he asked, pointing at the buffet table. "Of course, baby," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "You can have as much as you want." Marcus watched them walk to the food table, the little boy's face lighting up with joy, and he felt Maya slip her hand into his. "You did good." "Mr. Marcus," she said simply. He squeezed her hand gently. "We did good, Maya. You taught me how." That night, as Marcus drove home through the same streets where he'd once walked past so much suffering without seeing it, he thought about legacy. Not the legacy of buildings bearing his name or stock portfolios passed to heirs, but the legacy of lives changed, of chains of suffering broken, of whispers heard and answered. He thought about Maya, who would grow up knowing her voice mattered, that her needs were valid, that the world could be kind. He thought about Anna, who'd transformed from a victim of circumstance into a champion for others. And he thought about himself, the man he'd been and the man he'd become when he'd finally stopped long enough to listen. The rain had returned, tapping softly against his car windows. But this time Marcus wasn't trying to escape it. He was remembering a little girl who'd stood in the rain, whispering a wish, and how that whisper had echoed loud enough to change everything. Because that's the thing about whispers. They seem so small, so insignificant, so easy to ignore. until someone hears them, until someone cares, until someone decides that a child's hunger matters more than convenience, that a stranger's suffering demands action. That wealth means nothing if it's not used to lift others up. Maya had whispered her wish into the rain, never expecting an answer. But Marcus had heard, and in hearing he'd found not just a purpose but redemption. Not just a mission but meaning. Not just a way to spend his wealth, but a reason to have earned it in the first place. The world was still full of children whispering wishes they feared would never come true. But now, because one man had stopped to listen, there was a foundation dedicated to answering them. And that foundation would outlive Marcus, would outlive Maya, would continue long after they were both gone, a testament to the power of one whispered wish and one person willing to hear it. If Maya's story moved you, if it reminded you that every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, then please help us spread this message. Like this video, share it with someone who needs inspiration. Comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to Billionaire in Love. Together, we can amplify the whispers of those who need to be heard. Thank you for being part of this community of compassion.